The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not the good kind of quiet, not the kind you get on a Sunday morning when the coffee is hot and nobody needs anything from you. This was the kind of quiet that sits in your chest, the kind that makes you notice the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the baseboard heater, the small sounds a house makes when it thinks no one is listening. I stood in the front hallway with my coat still on and my keys in my hand, and I knew something was different before I even called out. The lights were off in the kitchen. My wife's jacket, the navy one she wore almost every day through October and November, was gone from the hook by the door. Her reading glasses weren't on the counter where she always left them. My stepdaughter's shoes weren't piled by the mat the way they usually were, 3 pairs at once, like she couldn't decide which ones to commit to. I set my keys in the bowl. I walked to the kitchen. I turned on the light. There was a note on the table, folded once with my name on the outside in my wife's handwriting. I don't know why I wiped the counter before I opened it. Habit, maybe. Or maybe some part of me already knew what it said and was buying itself a few extra seconds. I wiped the counter. I rinsed the cloth. I folded it over the faucet. Then I picked up the note. We've gone to see Kyle's family in Kelowna. It was getting tense around here and we both needed some space. Please find somewhere else to stay for a while. We'll talk when things settle down. I read it twice. I set it back on the table. I didn't shout. I didn't put my fist through anything. I just stood there in my kitchen in my coat with the baseboard heater ticking, and I thought about how I'd driven 45 minutes home from my shift at the lumber yard, and how I'd stopped at the superstore on the way to pick up the whipping cream my wife had texted me about that morning, and how the cream was still in the bag in my hand. I put it in the fridge. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the note for a long time. I'd been married to my wife for 6 years by then. We met when I was 54 and she was 49 at a community potluck at the Legion's Hall in our small town outside of Sudbury. She had a warmth to her that I hadn't been around in a long time. Her laugh was easy. She made room for people. I thought that was a rare thing. She had a daughter, 23 years old at the time, who'd moved back home after a relationship fell apart. Brianna, quiet in a way her mother wasn't. She watched me carefully the first few times I came around, the way a person does when they've been disappointed before and aren't sure whether to trust a new thing yet. I understood that. I didn't push. I showed up, was consistent, was kind. I thought that was all you could do. What I didn't know then, what I should have paid more attention to, was Kyle. Kyle was Brianna's on-again, off-again boyfriend. He'd been in the picture before I came along, had been asked to leave once by my wife for reasons she described as complicated, and had drifted back in somewhere around the time Brianna turned 24. He had a way of filling a room that I didn't like, loud opinions, easy with money that didn't seem to come from anywhere in particular. He called my wife by her first name and treated the house like a place he had standing in, even before he had any. My wife said I was too hard on him. She said he was trying. She said Brianna was happy. I wanted Brianna to be happy, so I let it go. That was the first time I let something go that I shouldn't have. The house was mine. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. I'd owned it for 11 years before I met my wife. Bought it after my first marriage ended. Fixed it up over time. New roof, new windows. The kitchen I'd done myself over 3 weekends one fall. My name was on the title. The mortgage was mine, and I paid it every month from my own account. When my wife moved in, we talked about finances the way 2 adults in their 50s should. We kept things simple. She contributed to groceries and household expenses. I covered the mortgage and utilities. It worked. Neither of us was wealthy, but we were comfortable. I had my pension coming, my RRSP, a bit set aside. About 2 years in, Brianna moved into the basement suite. It had its own entrance, its own bathroom. My wife had asked if it would be all right, said Brianna was between jobs and needed a few months to get back on her feet. I said yes. A few months became 18, and somewhere in there, Kyle became a permanent fixture in the suite too, though we never discussed that. He just started being there. At first a few nights a week, then most nights. Then I'd come downstairs for the extra folding table I kept in the storage room and find him eating cereal in my kitchen at 11 in the morning, like a man with no particular schedule and no particular concern about where he was. I mentioned it to my wife once. She said he was going through a difficult time. I said, "Aren't we all?" She didn't find that funny. What I remember most about that period is the slow way things change when you're inside them. You don't notice the weight being added because it's added gradually, one small thing at a time. Kyle's car needed work. Could I help cover the deductible? Just this once. Brianna's student loan was in collections. Could we look at maybe consolidating it somehow, just to give her a chance to breathe? The basement needed a new water heater. Obviously, I was going to handle that anyway, but was there any chance I could move it up a few months? And always it came through my wife. Never directly. Always over dinner. Always framed as a question. Always with that particular tone she had. Soft but pointed, like she was asking me to confirm something she'd already decided. I said yes, more times than I should have. Not because I was foolish, I want to believe that anyway, but because I loved her, and because I thought this was what you did for family, and because each individual ask seemed small enough that refusing felt petty. What I didn't see clearly enough was the pattern, the cumulative weight of all those small yeses. My wife handled the household account. I transferred money into it each month to cover shared expenses, groceries, internet, that kind of thing. We'd set the amount when she moved in and never revisited it. I trusted her. That's the part that comes back to me now when I'm trying to make sense of things. I trusted her. It was my accountant, of all people, who first made me stop and look at the numbers. I'd gone in for my annual tax appointment, a Tuesday afternoon in February. He'd done my taxes for 9 years, and we had the kind of comfortable shorthand that comes from sitting across a desk from the same person once a year for a long time. He went through everything, asked his questions, made his notes. Then he paused. "Your non-registered savings took a hit this year," he said. "Bigger than the TFSA contributions would explain." "Do you know what that's from?" I said I'd had some extra household expenses. He nodded, but he looked at his papers for a moment longer than usual. He didn't say anything else. I drove home thinking about that pause. That evening I sat down at my own computer and I looked at the household account, the one I'd been depositing into every month. The transactions went back further than I usually bothered to look. I scrolled through them slowly. The money I put in each month was going out faster than I'd understood. Not all to groceries. There were e-transfers, amounts I didn't recognize, going to a name I didn't know at first, until I looked more carefully and realized it was Kyle's last name with his middle initial. Small amounts some months, larger ones in others, going back 14 months. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I want to be fair to my wife. I want to hold on to that even now. She was not a malicious person. I don't believe she set out to deceive me. What I think happened is that she loved her daughter and she wanted Brianna to be okay, and she'd found a way to help that didn't require a conversation she knew I wouldn't enjoy. I think she told herself it was temporary. I think she told herself it wasn't really that much. I think she'd been telling herself those things for over a year by the time I found out, but she hadn't told me. I brought it up on a Thursday, showed her the transaction history on my phone, asked her to walk me through it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she should have told me. She said things had been hard for Brianna and Kyle, and she'd just been trying to help. She said she'd meant to say something. I asked how much in total. She told me a number. I sat with that number. I told her we needed to stop this. No more transfers. No more side arrangements. If Brianna and Kyle needed help, we would talk about it together as a couple and decide together. She agreed. She said she understood. I thought we'd turned a corner. What I didn't know was that Kyle had opinions about the situation. A few weeks later, Brianna came upstairs while I was making dinner. She sat at the kitchen island, which was unusual. She didn't often sit with me. She said she wanted to talk. She said Kyle was upset about what I'd said to her mother, that I'd made her mother feel accused of something, that it wasn't right for me to monitor the household account like that. I kept stirring whatever was in the pot. I turned the heat down. I said as evenly as I could manage that the household account was funded by my money and that I had every right to understand where it was going. She said Kyle felt that I'd never really accepted him, that I'd always made it clear he wasn't welcome in the house. I thought about all the times I'd look the other way, All the times I'd said nothing about the cereal at 11 in the morning, about the parking in my spot, about the friends he'd had over without asking. I said I'd tried to be fair. She said Kyle wanted me to apologize to her mother. I said I would not be doing that. She went back downstairs. That was November. By December, the temperature in the house had dropped to something you could feel when you walked in the door. My wife was quiet around me in a way she hadn't been before. Not cold exactly, but careful. Like someone who'd chosen a side and was sorry about it but wasn't changing her mind. I tried to talk to her. She said she needed time. I gave her time. Christmas was 2 weeks away. I thought maybe the holidays would help. I bought her a gift I'd thought about carefully. I'd planned to make the turkey myself this year, her family's recipe that she taught me 2 years ago. I drove home from work on the 23rd, stopped at the grocery store, bought the whipping cream, and I walked into a house that was too quiet, and a note on the kitchen table, and my wife and daughter were already gone. I sat with the note for maybe an hour. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't call my wife. I didn't call Brianna. I didn't call Kyle. I called my son. He's 31, lives in Halifax, works in marine engineering. We talk a few times a month, but we're not the kind of father and son who cover everything. He knew I'd remarried. He'd met my wife once, liked her. He knew the broad outlines of the situation with the basement. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, which is a thing I've always been grateful for in him. When I finished, there was a short silence. He said, "Dad, what do you want to do? Not what do I think you should do. What do you want to do?" I thought about that. I said I wanted to stop pretending that this was something I could fix by being patient. He said, "Okay." He said, "Do you need me to come home?" I said, "Not yet, but maybe soon." I spent the next 2 days doing things I should have done months earlier. I called my bank and had the household joint account frozen pending review. This was within my rights. I'd opened the account. My name was primary. The transfers to Kyle's name stopped. I called my lawyer, not to file anything yet, just to understand where I stood. She walked me through the relevant parts of Ontario family law. What was mine, what was considered marital property, what protections I had around the house. Given that I'd owned it before the marriage and had documentation to prove it, I felt calmer after that call than I had in months. Not happy. Calm. There's a difference. I changed the access code on the security system. I took stock of the finances the way I should have been doing all along. I looked at what I contributed to the household account over 14 months versus what had been spent on groceries and utilities versus what had gone to Kyle. It was a meaningful difference, enough that it mattered. I did not pack a bag. I did not look for somewhere else to stay. This was my house and I had paid the mortgage on it for 17 years, and I was not going anywhere. They came back on the 27th. I was at the kitchen table when I heard the car in the driveway. I'd made coffee. I had a cup in front of me. My wife came in first. She saw me sitting there and something moved across her face, surprise, and then something more complicated. She set her bag down. Brianna came in behind her. Kyle was behind her. He was carrying a duffel bag and had that easy way about him, that looseness, like a man who expects doors to open for him. He stopped when he saw me. I said, "Hello." My wife said they hadn't expected me to still be here. I said I imagined not. There was a long silence. Kyle said something about having a conversation, that there were some things they needed to talk through. He had that tone, not quite aggressive, but the kind of voice that expects to control the shape of things. I said yes, there were things to discuss. I said I'd like to start with the household account. I explained, clearly and without raising my voice, what I'd found. The 14 months of transfers. The total. I watched Kyle's face while I talked. Something went out of it. My wife sat down. I told them that the account was frozen, that I'd spoken to my lawyer, that moving forward I would be making decisions about this property and its finances, and that the current living arrangement in the basement suite needed to be reconsidered. Kyle said I had no right to. I said his name. Just his name. He stopped. I said that he was a guest in this house, that he had never been on a lease, never contributed to any bill, never been invited to have a voice in how this household ran, that his name was not on anything here, and mine was on everything. He looked at Brianna. She looked at her mother. My wife looked at me. She looked like someone who had gone somewhere expecting one version of a story and come home to find a different one entirely. We separated in the spring, not angrily, not easily either, but without the kind of ugliness that I'd feared. She was a good woman who had made choices she couldn't take back, and I was a man who had waited too long to say the things that needed saying. We were both responsible for how things had gotten to where they got. The house was mine. The lawyer was clear on that, and my wife didn't contest it. She and Brianna found a place to rent in town. Kyle was not part of that arrangement, as far as I know. I paid what the law required. Nothing more, nothing less. My son came home for 2 weeks in April. We painted the front porch and replaced the boards on the back deck, work I'd been putting off for 2 years. We didn't talk about what had happened every day, but we talked about it some. He asked good questions. I tried to answer them honestly. One evening we were sitting on the deck after dinner, in the last of the April light, and he asked me how I was. I sat with that for a minute. I said I was tired in a way I expected would lift, and that underneath the tired there was something that felt almost like relief. Not because the marriage was over, that was its own grief, and I didn't want to pretend otherwise. But relief because I'd finally stopped waiting for things to get better on their own, because I'd finally said what was true and let it land where it landed. He nodded. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "That's enough, Dad. That's actually enough." And I thought he was right. I refilled my coffee. The light did that thing it does in late April in northern Ontario, going golden and sideways across the yard, and I watched it for a while, and I thought about how strange it is. How you can carry something for so long that you forget there was a time before it, and then one day you set it down and you can finally feel the ground under your feet again. That's where I am now, still here, still standing, quieter in a way that's different from before. Not the wrong kind of quiet, the other kind. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working hard, but from holding your tongue for too long. I know that now in a way I didn't when I was younger. When I was younger, I thought patience was always a virtue. I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping something worth having. It isn't. What I carried through those years with my wife, the slow accumulation of small concessions, the transfers I didn't know about, the conversations I softened because I didn't want to be the difficult one. None of that was patience. It was avoidance dressed up to look like kindness. And the cost of that, in the end, was higher than any number I found in that transaction history. What strikes me most, looking back, is how the consequences followed so directly from the choices, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, the way water finds its level. My wife made choices she couldn't take back, and so did I. Hers were about loyalty, to a daughter, to Kyle, to a version of the story where she could help everyone without anyone getting hurt. Mine were about comfort, the comfort of not confronting what I could see building in front of me. Neither of us got away with it. That's not a harsh judgment, it's just what's true. The consequences of how we act have a way of arriving whether we've prepared for them or not. When Brianna sat at my kitchen island and told me Kyle felt I owed her mother an apology, something finally became clear to me. Not anger, not even hurt, but clarity. You can spend years hoping that goodwill is enough, that showing up and paying the bills and looking the other way will eventually be recognized and met in kind. But goodwill without honesty isn't a relationship. It's a transaction that only one person knows they're in. What I wish I'd understood earlier, and what I'd say to any man or woman in a version of what I lived through, is that doing right by the people you love is not the same as doing whatever they ask. There's a kind of integrity that requires you to say the hard thing, to name what you see, to hold a line even when holding it makes the room go cold. I failed at that for too long. I let things drift because confrontation felt unkind. What I didn't understand was that the silence was its own unkindness, to my wife, to myself, to any real chance we had. And then there's what Connor did when I called him that December evening. He didn't tell me what to do. He asked what I wanted. That question cracked something open in me, because I had stopped asking myself that. I'd been so focused on managing everyone else's comfort that I had lost track of my own sense of what was right, what was mine, what I was and wasn't willing to accept. It took nerve to make those calls the next morning. To the bank, to the lawyer, to sit at my own table when they came home and speak plainly without raising my voice. But that nerve was always there. I just hadn't called on it in years. I'm 63 now. I repainted the front porch. The back deck is solid again. The house is quiet in the way I used to love, before I forgot what good quiet felt like. I don't regret the years. I regret the silence, but I'm not carrying it anymore.